Right about now.
Right about now.
You're about to witness
The Funk Soul Brother.
Jonathan Small.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Right About Now podcast. This is John Small. All right. On this episode, we're going to go behind the scenes with author Trish Lundy to find out what it takes to get a YA novel written, sold, and distributed by a major publishing house in today's market. That's because Trish Lundy just released her eminently readable debut YA thriller. It's called The One That Got Away with Murder, and it's published by Henry Holt and Company, and it just came out last week. So we're going to get into that with Trish, but before we do, I have a few housekeeping notes. Okay, number one, you may be aware that I am releasing my own book next month called Right About Now, and I invite my listeners to join what I am calling my book launch squad. What is that, you ask? That is a series of trusted individuals, hopefully listeners to this podcast, who will read my book about a week before it comes out and leave a review on Amazon. This is extremely helpful in getting the book out there, getting Amazon to recognize the book. And so I'm hoping that you can help me get the word out by leaving a review. So if you are interested in doing this, all you have to do is sign up using a link that I will provide in the description. So just go to the description, click on that link, and there is a very, very simple to fill out form, and then we will email you with the rest of the information. So thank you in advance for that. Okay, here's another thing I wanted to mention to you. I will be offering another masterclass on writing at the end of June. It is called The Secret Formula to Writing Nonfiction Stories That Sell. This is the same lecture that I gave a few months ago, but it's back by popular demand. It'll be offered on June 27th. And I am super excited about this. I'm looking at the website right now. There are only 8 more spots available in this class. So please sign up if you are interested. All the details are on the website, the Writing Workshops website. Again, I will leave a link in the description. You can also find information on my Instagram, which is Right About Now Pod, or on my website, rightaboutnowmedia.com. All right, so that's enough of my housekeeping information. Let's get back to my interview with Trish Lundy. Super interesting talk with Trish. She shares her origin story as a young writer. You know how much I love a good origin story. Then she takes me through the process of how she wrote multiple manuscripts before finally getting it right. She threw out some manuscripts here, people, so don't think you're going to get it right always on the first try. She then goes through her journey of finding an agent. And disclaimer here, we share the same agent. Actually, this is not how I found Trish, but it turns out later I learned that we share the same agent, a wonderful woman by the name of Kristen Van Ogtrop, who has been on my show talking about being an agent, but also talking about her writing career. So Trish offers insights into writing young adult thrillers. I had lots of questions about like what you can and can't write about when you write for young adults. She talks about the collaborative process of writing a book. It took a village to get this book where it is today, including working with Kristen, her agent, and another agent at the Inkwell Management Agency, working with her editor to refine the book to get it where it is now. And lastly, she shares her valuable advice to all aspiring writers. This will be something you really want to hear if you're just like, I can't do it. I can't finish this damn book, or I can't even start this darn book. It's always really cool to hear from somebody who's been through the process and come out the other end successful. So I'm super excited to share this interview with Trish Lundy. If you enjoy what you hear, be sure to leave me a like, maybe even a review in the place where you are listening to this podcast. Super helpful always. So without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Trish Lundy. Trish Lundy, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
Thank you for having me on, and I'm excited.
I'm excited to have you. It's always really fun to talk to first-time published writers, and what a great debut. It's really fun. I have not finished reading your book, but I'm probably like halfway through, so don't tell me the ending. Please don't tell me how it ends. But I love it. I love your dialogue. I love the kind of pacing of it. It's really good. Tell me a little bit about how this all came about. Like, what is your background as a writer? How did this all come about for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for reading. I grew up like being a daily diarist. I would say that's how I really started writing. I didn't really get into fiction until college when I experimented a lot with short stories and kind of figuring out what genre I wanted to write in. Did a lot of fantasy. Obviously, I'm not a fantasy writer. But yeah, I went to UCLA and I took a short story class. And it was really kind of the first time that I thought maybe I'll get serious about this and try to pursue, a career as a writer. And so I just wrote a lot of stuff. I wrote a novel in college that is horrible. And when I graduated, I got a job in marketing. So that was my day job, digital marketing for like B2B. And I just wrote a lot in the mornings and at night. So that was probably like for 10 years, I did that until I sold my first book. But I did sell, some short fiction. I wrote short speculative fiction and just kind of experimented a lot. But, mystery and thrillers is kind of what I grew up on. So I wanted to try my hand at that. And that's how I guess, found myself writing YA thrillers.
Yeah. So you were reading a lot of that growing up and even today.
Yeah. I came of age when like court TV was in its heyday, I would say. So I was watching a lot of real true crime. Probably shouldn't have been watching when I was watching.
At your age? Oh, no, my daughter loves it and she's 14. So
yeah. And I grew up, I read a lot of Caroline B. Cooney's mysteries, which were, very popular for middle grade, like in middle school. That's all I read. I loved also horror, Stephen King. And I think there's a close intersection between horror and thrillers. But yeah, read a lot of mysteries. I mean, that's still kind of my go-to genre for reading and for watching. I just watched a new season of True Detective and I loved it.
It was so good.
It was so great.
By the way, Jodie Foster sighting the other day at the local cafe and I almost had a heart attack. Couldn't believe it.
Oh
I
my
had
God.
just watched it. So it was kind of weird because I literally just watched it and the next day went to get coffee and I saw her standing next to me and I was like, I didn't say anything to her because I don't like to freak celebrities out, but she seemed nice. Like she was chatty with the person that was doing her coffee and stuff.
Yeah, she seems like such a gem. I actually just listened to your podcast with when you interviewed the FBI agent who
worked with her, right? I thought about that.
Worked with her. Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, what an amazing experience. Anyway, so I think we both like the same thing. I love good true detective, like good crime thriller. And you said this is 10 years after you graduated from school, you got this book deal. Did you try to get other books published before this?
Yes. So I think kind of like shortly after I graduated, I had a manuscript that I really believed in. And I tried querying for literary agents and just, I definitely was not ready. My work was not ready for prime time, but I tried. Yeah. And so then I was like, I think I just need a lot more experience. I need to write a lot more and kind of learn about my craft a lot more.
How did you get to learn more? Like, did you just do it yourself or did you take classes or like, what did you do?
I pretty much did it myself in terms of just like thinking about ideas, being like, I think this could work as a novel. I think that's kind of the first thing I had to learn was like, what's a short story idea versus a book idea? And does it have legs to be a book? I'd read some kind of craft books, if you will, but I just wrote maybe like 5 or so books to just like learn how to write a book. So that was my process. Some people just write a great book on their first try, but I had to do it a few times.
But it's great that you stuck with it because I think unlike me, I wrote a book a few years ago, actually for a UCLA, like one of those kind of like, what do you call like auxiliary classes? It was like how to write a novel in 10 weeks. And I took it for UCLA and it was great class. I love the teacher, but I wrote this book and then I don't know, like I didn't like it. And then I kind of gave up on it, and it's like, you just kept plugging away and then you would start a new book, right? Like, how did you have the fortitude to just kind of like be like, okay, I'm going to move on to a new book?
That's a good question. I think at the end of the day for writing, like I'm always going to be a writer, whether the work sells or not. Like if I wasn't selling stuff, I would still be writing because that's like my outlet. So I think that passion is kind of what keeps me going because like for 10 years, I didn't sell a book. And I actually did write a book that got me my agents, but that didn't, maybe it could still sell potentially, but it didn't sell on sub, which I had heard about happening. And I was like, wow, that would really be awful to go through that. But, it's more common than you think.
It happened to me with a nonfiction book. But, and to explain to people what that means on sub, meaning that you have submitted to your agent, you get an agent, which is very exciting because that's hard enough to get. And then they send it around. You sort of think once you get the agent, like you're going to get a book deal. Maybe
Yes.
naively, I thought that, like, especially, was this Kristen at the time?
Yes.
Yeah. And we've talked about this, and we share an agent and a good friend of mine, Kristen von Ogtrop, and she's an amazing agent. And she's also great because she's also an editor. So she really has a good instinct about like story and things like that. But like even somebody as brilliant as Kristen can't always sell a book, I mean, it's just things that you have no control over, like what they may be looking for.
Right.
So was it disappointing when she sent it out to 1 million publishing houses and they all said no?
Yeah. Well, I think the best advice that I've always heard when writing and that you hear is like, always be working on your next project. Because when you do go on sub, or you do have, going on submission to editors when you're, like you said, your agent takes your book out, it's very nerve-wracking because you're just waiting around and that's not in your control. You don't have control over whether the editor who read your book had a bad day. They just bought a book very similar. They just don't like your writing for whatever reason. You don't have control over that. So as soon as we went on submission with that first book, I immediately was starting to work on something new. And that ended up being the book I sold. So we went on submission to, I would say, like a small list of editors who we thought could really jive with the book. And I just felt like we were getting near misses. And I was like, maybe this isn't going to happen for this one. And I think I felt that too, because I was just so confident in the new piece I was working on. And I just really thought this could be the one. So then when I sent it over to Kristen and Stephen, I'm also repped by Stephen Barbara at Inkwell, they were like, yeah, we think this is the one. We think it's even better. And it was a different experience. It kind of sold a lot, more quickly than the first one, which I know people who they have a book out for a year, 10 months, and they get a book deal. So that's not to say it doesn't need to happen in like a week, but it was just a different kind of response the second time.
What do you think you did differently the second time around?
I think for me, my first book was also young adult. It was a coming of age mystery story. So it kind of towed the line between coming of age and mystery.
Yeah.
And I think editors were like, I like the mystery part and there's not enough of that. And I was like, I'm just going to go like full throttle thriller.
Yeah.
And so that kind of, I was like, I'm just going to take a lot of risks and go for it with this one. So I think, my book, The One That Got Away with Murder, it's a little bit more in your face and kind of like hits the ground running from the start.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what's different.
I'll say it starts off kind of with a steamy love scene.
Yeah.
I was like, damn, which is great. Was that a conscious choice? Was that something you did later in the edit, or did the book always start?
No, the opening chapter is pretty much how I had written it. I think what we changed in editing was I kind of withheld a little bit more about Lauren. Then we learned like she's just moved and she's a new senior and blah, blah, blah. But the kind of events as they unfolded was always the same, because I think it says a lot about her character and kind of how she's dealing with things. And then the trajectory of her character by the end of the novel, she's basically emotionally unavailable at the beginning of the book. And by the end of the book, she's more emotionally available. So.
Very important, by the way, very important lesson for writers out there. There has to be an arc, right? I mean, it's an obvious thing.
Yeah.
But maybe to us, but I think to a lot of people, they forget that part. Like, how did the character change in the course of this novel?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
How did you come up with the idea for this story?
Well, I remember sitting down on my couch and I was like, I need to brainstorm ideas.
Yeah.
And I love having like dedicated brainstorming time. Otherwise, I get good ideas when I'm like blow drying my hair, something where it's like you can't literally do anything else, or the car or whatever. But I kind of had this idea of these two brothers who were accused of murder. And I thought that would be interesting. And like, what are the chances of that? And kind of that's ironic. And that was kind of the first image I had. Mm-hmm. And then I was thinking about like, who is the character into the window into that? What kind of character would want to get close to that?
Yep.
Too. And so I kind of wanted to write a different sort of character than I had written previously. Someone who is kind of making a lot of mistakes and they're trying to figure it all out, but they keep getting into worse and worse situations. So I think those two things were the kind of first ideas. And then the first chapter flowed pretty easily. And then I kind of outlined the rest of it.
So you're not a pantser necessarily, right? The pantser, the plotter, or whatever they call them.
Kind of a hybrid, or like what they call a discovery writer. I definitely outline some major points in like the 3-act structure. Since I write thrillers, I know who like the guilty party or parties are, but I often veer off course a little bit with like how I get to the ending. Maybe I'll outline it a certain way, but when I sit down to write, it's different. So I definitely do a little bit of both. I'm not somebody who like beats out every single beat of the story. I just like my brain can't do that.
Do you have like little cards that you keep up, or do you just have like a written outline somewhere?
I just use a written outline. Like I'll use like a Google Doc and it's a very basic outline, but I'll have like the kind of detailed version in my head. I don't know.
Do you think a lot about the characters before you even start writing the outline, or even before you start writing the book? Like your characters are really good. And you, like you said, it was inspired by two, like an idea that you had about these brothers, the Crestone brothers, right?
Yes, Crestmont brothers.
Sorry,
yes.
The Crestmont brothers.
Oh, you're close.
I was so close. The Crestmont brothers. And like, tell me, did you have to sort of flush them out a bit, like on paper or just in your mind before you could sort of like understand, and then of course there's Laura, who has her own kind of background that you need to kind of delve into.
Yeah, I would say I definitely give the characters a lot of thought, and I will kind of have an idea of who they are, maybe jotting down like some of their backstory or things they like or their taste in things. And then I think a lot of characters revealed, through action, like how are they interacting with other characters and why? Are they evasive? Are they hiding something? How does their past inform how they deal with things? So I definitely have an idea before I sit down to write, but definitely more gets revealed to me through the writing. And then sometimes I'll go back and kind of edit things based on, I'm like, okay, I really understand, their trajectory right now.
This episode of Right About Now is brought to you by AG1. And this is not just a plug here. I actually use and like this product quite a bit. I've partnered with AG1 because they make a really high quality product that I genuinely look forward to drinking every day. And you cannot say that for me and many health products. So take my word on this one. You will like the way this tastes, and you will like the way it makes you feel. And it also makes the whole process of taking supplements a lot simpler. Like I just don't want to have bottles and bottles of different pills in my cabinets. I just take 1 scoop of AG1 in my smoothie every morning and boom, I'm good to go. I've got all the prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes that I need for my always grouchy gut. So look, take my word for it. Do I lie that much on this podcast? Not really. AG1 is definitely worth it. And I've got a special deal for my Right About Now listeners. You try AG1 and you will get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 and K2, and also 5 free AG1 travel packs to take with you when you are on the road. All you have to do is go to drinkag1.com/rightaboutnow. That is drinkag1.com/right, WRITE, about now. All right, back to the show. So you said you have a I don't know if you still have a full-time job, but you said at one point you had a full-time job in marketing. Is writing now your full-time, or do you still have to sort of do it on the side while you do your other full-time?
Well, that's a good question. I don't have a full-time job. I do freelance work in addition to writing books. And then I'm also a mom to a 18-month-old toddler.
That's a lot of work. Yeah.
So I actually had my daughter, she was 2 months old when I got my book deal. So just balancing like that, plus my freelance work, plus books is a lot. Maybe I would go back to more full-time work when she gets a little bit older. But for right now, that kind of works out.
So just to backtrack a little bit, I'm sort of like having these memories that Kristen told me that you met her when you were pregnant. Like, how did you actually get an agent? How did you find Kristen? Like, I'm just nepotism baby. Like I just knew her. So she likes me.
Well, I kind of have a weird story for how I got my agent. So I think I told you, like, when I first graduated college, I started querying agents. My writing just wasn't very good, to be honest. Yeah. So when I had a manuscript, about 10 years later that I thought, okay, I think I'm ready, I sent out about 8 queries and I got a full request from one of those queries. And I wanted to see, like, how well is this query package going, So during that time, my grandmother passed away and she lives in a small town in State College, Pennsylvania, where the book is set. Yeah. And at her funeral, I was talking to this really nice woman and she asked me what I did for work. She was like my uncle's neighbor. Their kids played soccer together. And I was like, I could tell her about my day job, or like I could tell her about this book I just wrote. So I was like, oh, I just wrote a YA novel and I'm, trying to get it published. She said, oh, my sister's a literary agent. And she pulls out her phone and her sister was Kristen. Oh, that's always nice. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. So I was like, I'd love to pick Kristen's brain about publishing. Inkwell is on my query list. And so I set up a call with Kristen and just kind of asked her best publishing advice. And at the end of the call, she's like, well, why don't you go ahead and send me your query package and we'll go from there. And then she ended up loving the book, and her colleague, Steven, offered they wanted me to revise some of the book. And then if I kind of did that and they were happy with it, they would offer me representation, and they did. So that's how I got my agent. Yeah. So it was kind of just a really weird connection. But you were putting it out there. You got to put it out there in the universe. Can't be shy about what you do. Right? Yes, exactly. You got to tell people what you're doing. Yeah, exactly. All right, back to the book. So it's a YA, and you said your first book that you wrote, and most of the books that you've written to this date are they mostly YA? Is that the genre that you play in? Tell me why that genre appeals to you. I just love teenagers because they're just going through it. They have big emotions. High school is like crazy. You're kind of stuck in this community with people that maybe you had a bad breakup or like a backstabbing friend, and you still have to like interact with them. Yeah. It's like this little, petri dish of drama. And I think when you're a teenager, you're just figuring out a lot about yourself, and everything is really intense. And I think teenagers are good about like being honest with their emotions, and they're looking for ways to express themselves. And that was true for me as a teenager. And that's a version to myself I'm very close to. And it was just a very impressionable time. So I think that's why I like to write for teens. And they'll do things that adults won't necessarily do too. Yeah. And so I think, maybe an adult would be like, oh, I found this evidence of murder. I'm just going to ignore it or take it to the police or whatever. But a teenager would be like, oh my God, what is this? I need to figure out what's going on, So I just think the emotional truth of being a teenager, there's a lot to explore there. Sure. So that's why I like writing for teens. Now you're young, but do you ever feel like, maybe teenagers are different now than they were when you were a teenager? For example, like you have, people like doing texting in your book and like talking about Snapchat and stuff. So I don't know how far removed you are from being a teenager. You're pretty young, but I think you said, so I'm not even going to go there. I'm 31. Oh my God. So I'm a little far removed. Okay. And of course you're like a late millennial. So you feel tapped into like the Gen Z, like, is it different? I guess is what I'm asking. Well, yes and no. Like, I just think there are just universal themes about being a teenager, like experiencing your first love and heartbreak and friend breakup for the first time, figuring out what you want to do with your life, figuring out what you like. You're kind of like starting to realize your parents are real people and maybe you don't agree with them, or maybe you don't want to obey their rules or whatever. I think those are all the same. I think maybe that manifests in different ways. I have cousins who are teenagers, like in high school and college. And so I definitely like see what I guess the trends are or what they're using to communicate. But it's still the same. I have an 18-year-old, so I kind of
and a 14-year-old. So I guess they're both teenagers. So yeah, I think if you're around them, but it does intimidate me a little because I have thought about writing YA, but I feel like, do I know enough about, I'm pretty far removed in my age, but I sort of can always relate to that period of my life a lot. Like I just feel like that was a very formative time in my life. So I'm very connected. And it sounds like it's true with you too.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess what's different about nowadays being a teenager, and this could have also just been the teenagers I was around, like my main character, I actually moved across the country in high school. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and I moved to San Jose, California. And everyone was like so nice. I was the new girl. I literally knew nobody and they were so welcoming. And I don't know, everybody was just like really supportive. And I see some of the things like my cousins have told me that teenagers will like say to each other or text each other. And I was like, wow, we were like not doing that at this age. Like they're a little more worldly, I think, than I was at that age, even though I was still, I don't know, I was pretty aware of stuff, I guess. But I don't know, I guess like less fear and just being very blunt and honest about things. So that could just be my cousin's friends or something. But I think that's a little bit different. I think social media is way bigger now than when I was in high school. Facebook was just kind of a new thing, MySpace. Now it's constant.
And the way they communicate is that way. So it's like doing dialogue is sometimes tricky because that's not even really how they talk to each other. Right.
Right. But yeah, I think, for books, obviously, I like to incorporate a little bit of modernity in my books because it's like you are writing for the audience now. I'm not going to talk about, I don't know, using like a landline in a book where it doesn't make sense. But at the same time, I think, at the core, emotional truths, like that's what teens respond to. So if they're there with your character, they care about what your character cares about, then that's really what matters at the end of the day.
Tell me about it. Are there certain rules for YA books that like your book is not a YA book if you do these things? Obviously, a YA book is about young adults. So that's one rule.
Right.
But like I noticed, there's like we talked, there's sex in your book. There's drinking in your book. Like, are there taboo topics in YA books, or are there certain rules? Like there's certain things you just can't do to make it a YA book?
Well, that's a good question. And that's something that people like in the book community talk about a lot. Like in terms of, for example, sex, I mean, like having very explicit, gratuitous sex would be a taboo for YA. I have read books where stuff is explicit, but maybe the book is like talking about sexual assault and it's about a character who is coming to terms with what they've been through. And so I think some of the explicit stuff needs to be there, just explicit in the way things like are described. But I don't think that's bad. And I think teens can handle that. I think teens are pretty good about if they pick up a book and they're like, oh, this has stuff I don't really want to read, like they'll pick another book. I think they're pretty good at knowing what they want to read. But I think anything really gratuitous or graphic, you need to justify more in young adult. In my book, there is drinking, there are drugs, but there's an arc to that in my book. Lauren starts out with like kind of using alcohol to cope. And then towards the end of the book, she makes a plan when she goes to a party and she doesn't drink. There's a character using drugs who goes to rehab because she is an addict, So I think in YA, you have to be careful because teens are impressionable.
Right, you don't want to celebrate.
But I don't think you have to like sugarcoat things. I would say in YA, usually there's a little bit of an hopeful ending. Even if it's a book dealing with kind of bleaker topics, that might differentiate it from, like an adult novel.
Right. You talked about YA, talk about the thriller, like the genre of the thriller. There seems to be like certain ways that you write a thriller to make it a thriller. And some of it you might have just learned through osmosis because you read a lot of thrillers and like thrillers. So it's kind of like, you're just writing because what you like. So it's like you haven't even really actually thought like intellectually about like, why is this a thriller? Like I remember I've talked to some thriller writers that talk about like, every chapter has to sort of end on a cliffhanger, or like, were there certain things that you did that were very thriller-esque that you kind of learned over the years work to make a thriller more thrilling?
Yeah, well, I think, there's different types of thrillers.
Right.
So I think when you're writing a book, you do need to make a decision about what kind of thriller you're writing.
Yeah.
My book is a whodunit. So we don't know who the killer is.
It's kind of a mystery too. Yeah. I guess that's different though. Whodunit's different than a mystery.
Yeah, I mean, there's close overlap. I think with a thriller, you want to feel like the character is in danger, kind of a little bit as an undertone throughout. And some lean really hard into that, where it's like every scene, you're like, is this person going to make it out alive? Or maybe there's ebbs and flows to that. But, there's psychological thrillers, there's unreliable narrators. And I think for a whodunit, something I was conscious about is like, there needs to be multiple suspects in this. And people need to be hiding things because your reader, I think
you have a lot of secrets.
Yeah, I think YA thrillers, YA thriller readers, they like to be surprised by who the killer is, but they also don't want to be like, wow, this totally came out of left field and there was no way this could be plausible. There's like this kind of fine balance about leaving some breadcrumbs, but not leaving too many. So something I did consciously, like on sequential drafts, was upping the suspicion of certain characters who, like, when I was writing it, I did not intend for them to be a suspect.
Right.
But like when my agents read it or my editors, and they're like, oh, I was kind of suspicious of this person. Let's kind of up the ante with them. For example, Sadie by Courtney Summers is like one of the most famous YA thrillers. It's literally the best. I mean, it's phenomenal, where you know who the killer is, but the main character is trying to catch him. Like she's on the hunt for him because we don't know where he is. So it's a different kind of a thriller.
Not so much a whodunit, but like where is the done it? Where's the doer?
Right. Like, where is she going? And she's on the run. So she's also missing, like, from her family. So it's like dual perspective. Yeah. I don't know if you've read that.
No.
Courtney Summers is the GOAT. She's
really?
If you are getting into YA thrillers, I'd recommend Sadie for sure.
I definitely want to read that one. Too bad that my friend named his little girl Sadie. So, okay. Your process. I love hearing about a writer's process. Did you have a pretty organized, like, do you kind of clock in the morning, write a certain amount of pages a day, or was it just kind of like whatever you felt inspired by that day? Like, how did you get this book done?
At the beginning, yes, I used to, before children, like first thing in the morning, coffee, just pound it out for like 2 hours. That's my best time to work. I love that. And at the time, I was pregnant when I was writing this. So I was like, I need to get a first draft done before I have my kid, because I'm sure that my brain power for drafting is going to be like zero. Yeah. But I'll have a draft done and then I can edit it and send it to my agent. So that's what I did. So I was kind of like working daily in the morning on the book for a few months. And then, now my process is at night. Yeah. So now I'm a night writer.
I think I became a night writer after kids too, because I can't think, it's just impossible. The morning's absolutely impossible unless you get up.
Yeah, it's just like, or even if I was like, I'll just plop her in front of the TV and but it's like, no, they're moving around. Like they don't just sit there.
You need that uninterrupted time, because there's nothing worse for a writer than being in the groove and then somebody comes in and disrupts you and you're like, no.
It's like, literally get away from me. I do like admin stuff in the morning. So I'll, respond to emails, or if I need to make a graphic in Canva to promote something, I'll do that. But now I write at night, and I don't really have a daily word count or a time count anymore. It's just, I need to just work as long as I can and get as much done as I can and then do it again the next day. So that's kind of how
long did it take you to write this one?
I think I came up with the idea in like May of 2022. Okay. And then by September, I had a completed draft.
Wow.
And I edited it in October, and we went out with it in November, and we sold it December 1st. So it was a quick timeline.
That's really impressive and kind of inspiring, because I would probably obsess over the book, and it would take me, I'm actually a very fast writer, but I think I would doubt myself so much on the pages. Did you go through a lot of doubt? And you seem like a pretty confident person, but on good days.
Of course I doubted, but I think I was just like tunnel vision. I was like, I need to get this book done.
Yeah. Also, you had the baby ticking clock, right?
Yeah. The baby, it was kind of like I couldn't obsess over it.
Yeah.
it was a lot calmer even going out on submission with this book because I had essentially a newborn.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of humbling. So it's not like I'm just stewing about the book. But, when I sent it over to Kristen and Steven, I thought they were going to say, okay, let's take a few months and edit it. And then in the new year, we'll go out with the book because it was going to be like Thanksgiving and the holidays. And, I know publishing kind of slows down. And to my surprise, they're like, this is great. Can you make these changes in the next 2 weeks? So we want to take it out.
That's
and
awesome.
I was like, great. Definitely more self-doubt set in during the editing process. Like after I sold the book, like doing major developmental edits and copy edits. I was like, is this thing even good? Should I have even gotten this book deal? What am I doing?
Oh, did they have did your editor have a lot of notes once you got the deal?
Yes and no. I would say not comparatively so,
Mm-hmm.
but I had to make a lot of big changes in like a month, which I all agreed with. I love my editors. I work with Mark Podesta and Anne-Marie Wong at Henry Holt Books for Young Readers, which is an imprint at Macmillan. They're fantastic. Everything they put forth, I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And I would kind of jump off from there. But I think when you're kind of really dissecting and analyzing your own book for like 5 months, you're like, I don't really know how to judge this anymore. But it's a very common experience from other authors I've talked to where you go through a cycle. You're like, I'm so excited about my book. Oh my gosh, I hate this. Is this even good? And then you're like, I'm excited again.
Yeah.
So you kind of go up and down with that. So that was definitely true for me.
Yeah. What was that moment when you were starting to have a lot of kind of doubts? Like, should I have even was that when you were doing the notes for Kristen and Mark, or when you gave it already over to Henry Holt?
I think it was when I gave it over to Henry Holt,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to do my developmental edits with a 3-month-old, and I had some stuff going on with her, and you're just not sleeping. I mean, you're just severely sleep deprived. Yeah. And then I'd be like, let me get a big coffee at 8 p.m. and like try to write for a few hours before I have to wake up at 2 a.m. and feed the baby,
Right.
So I think that was just really hard. And then I think when you get copy editors who they're incredible, they're literally looking at your book for continuity, timeline, descriptions, every little detail. So they're like, hey, this in the timeline doesn't make sense. They're pointing out and flagging like every issue with your book. And so I was like, oh my gosh, you're right, but that's their job. They're kind of, you want them to do that. They did a fantastic job with that.
Did they come up with a title? The one that got away with murder, or was that yours?
That wasn't my original title. We came up with it. My publisher really wanted to have murder in the title. Mm-hmm. So, my editors and I kind of generated ideas, and then the publisher was like, okay, we want murder in the title. So then we kind of thought about titles with that. And then I honestly can't remember who came up with the one that got away with murder, but we were all like, yeah, that sounds great. And then they were all happy with that. So
I can't tell you the amount of times that the amount of lists that Kristen and I generated for titles for my book.
Yeah. And titles are really hard. I also feel like I haven't sold anything yet in film and TV writing, but I have a writing partner and I've done that for a while too. Cool. And I think because in script writing, like, the script is not the final product. You get notes from so many people. I think that trained me to just be like, really not emotional about having to change things unless it's something where I'm like, this is integral to the story. And this is like, we need to have this in here, or this is something I firmly believe in. Of course I have those things, but I'm like, yeah, we need a different title. Like, I'm cool with that. I think learning to not be so precious with every single thing is part of the collaborative process of, working on a book, because it is very collaborative. So they're like, we want murder. I was like, great, let's put murder on the cover,
That seems to make sense. What do you enjoy more? I didn't realize that you also wrote scripts for film and TV. What kind of writing do you enjoy more, that or the novel writing?
Well,
taking the equation of money out of it, because one pays potentially a lot more than the other.
They're both different. To be honest, my dream was to go to film school when I was in college. Mm-hmm. And I had a really unfortunate kind of experience with some film professors at where I went to school. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't want to go to this film school. So I almost transferred to Tisch, to NYU.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm going to be in a lot of debt if I do this. Maybe I should just finish my English degree at UCLA. So that's what I did. But I still wanted to, pursue that. I think the kind of experiences I had where I got a little bit jaded about film writing kind of led me to experiment with prose more. But I really love both. I mean, I love different writing in different mediums. And I think with scripts, you can't get in a character's head. Like you need to know the beats, like what is happening. Yeah. And I think with novel writing, something I think I'm an underwriter usually. Like my first draft is a little bit lean and then I go back and add more in, and I'm getting better at that because you really want to get into the interiority of the character and like in their head. And someone says something to them. Well, what do they think about that? We have access to that. Where like in a script, you don't. So I think it's fun to kind of go between them. I mean, I love book writing because you get in the character's head, but it's also fun to just like, I guess, not have access to that and challenge yourself to really be descriptive about the action. So I think it helps you be a better writer.
Why do you have a partner in the other type of writing you do?
Well, that's kind of how I got back into doing some screenwriting stuff. My friend, we went to high school together. She was an actor and she was kind of getting a little bit jaded about the part she was going out for. She booked a series lead. She's had a lot of success. I mean, she's amazing.
Wow.
But she's like, I just want to write my own stuff. Like, would you be down to write some stuff? So it kind of just started off as a fun thing. And
I've never written with a partner. I think that would be really cool. I mean, writing is such a solitary thing. It's kind of must be nice to kind of like be able to bounce stuff off of people.
Yeah. And I think with screenwriting, it lends itself to that more. You'll see a lot of writing partnerships because it is very collaborative. And book writing, you kind of need to go away and do your own thing a little bit more and to get inside somebody's head. So I think it's just fun to explore different things. And I just really enjoy it. It's also fun. Like if you're stuck on one project, you can kind of switch and that can be helpful too.
Well, you had mentioned that somebody gave you advice early on, like always be working on a new project or something, right?
Yeah.
Let's follow up, like more advice to aspiring writers, because you seem to have that something in your psychology and your DNA that you're not going to quit. Like you'll just keep doing it. What advice would you give to aspiring writers who might get like, just need some inspiration to keep going?
Yeah. First of all, you have to ask yourself, why do you enjoy writing? And I think you need to know that reason. Like, do you enjoy it because it gives you purpose? It helps you express yourself?
That's a good question. I should have asked you that question.
I am just a much nicer, happier person to be around if I've written for the day. Like that is how I express myself. That is my purpose. And it even sometimes if I'm like writing, and it's not to say it's always easy. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, what am I going to do with this scene? But it's like very satisfying to do. And so I think that has just always been my drive. And that's why I enjoy it.
What's satisfying about it? Is it satisfying sort of like getting into your characters, or is it just something sort of just the getting it done part? Like what's the satisfying part about it?
I think it's getting into your characters, and I'm always trying to like level up in my craft too. So it's like, how can I really like make this scene explode off the page and stand out? And you're kind of always trying to push yourself to the next level. And that is something I've kind of done my whole life. I guess I was like a very studious student. I just enjoy trying to better myself in that way. But I also just love expressing myself through that. So even it's like, I'm not my character, but I get to like explore themes or questions, that, haunt me or whatever that I'm into through my work. So I think that's why it's satisfying. And I would also say, it's not always enough to just have yourself to be like, yeah, I'm going to write. I think you don't need 10 people, but having like one or two friends who are big readers or who are writers or whatever, who can give you trusted notes, who can be encouraging to you. You send them a draft and they're like, oh my gosh, I just love this character. Like you need that. And I think finding those people is really important. Like for me, one of my friends we met because we were like both into like YA fantasy literature, and she's a big reader. And I just started sending her my stuff, and she's like my first reader, and she'll always be like, oh my gosh, just like hype me up.
Yeah.
And you need that to keep going.
Yeah.
So I think finding,
and it's,
you need a couple cheerleaders.
Yeah. And you have to be careful also who you send to, because if you send to people who are too kind of critical, that might kind of freak you out. Yeah. The biggest mistake I think I ever made with the novel was that this is the same novel I wrote at UCLA. I sent it to an agent, not Kristen, another agent, before it was really ready to be seen. And I knew her because she had read some other stuff I'd read. So she actually read it. And then she had a million questions and like, I don't understand if this is a YA, or, she had like, it was like, she definitely did not like, it did not blow her away. Right. Let's just put it that way. And I was like, as soon as I got those notes, I was like, I'm never writing again. Like, I'm done. And like put it in the drawer, and like totally like discouraged me. Cut to like 4 years later, and her and I are working on another book project together. And I mentioned that to her. I was like, do you remember that time I sent? And she's like, I have no memory of that. I don't even remember. So like, and this event that meant like so much to me, she didn't even remember. She didn't even remember me sending the book to her. I mean, I don't even know how much time she even spent reading it. So anyway, don't let those things get you down. But also, I guess the other point of that was like, don't really send it out to people who can be critical, because it could have a detrimental effect.
Definitely. Here's the thing with writing, like it is subjective. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the best tips I have on getting notes, this is something that, Neil Gaiman has talked about. It's something you'll hear, in the screenwriting community. The best notes you get are when people are like, I was a little confused by this part, or I wanted to know more about what happened here. And if you get like maybe a couple people saying the same thing, then okay, this was confusing.
Yeah.
Or asking people like, what parts were most exciting to you. But I think the best notes are not, you need to fix this part because I didn't like it. It's like, well, you're not the writer, so I get to decide that.
Yeah. And then also it's just,
like, I wanted to know more. I was confused by it. It's kind of like open-ended questions that can get you thinking about, how you want to address that in the next draft. So that's really the best kind of notes, is that are more like, it is critique, but it's constructive. It's not like, I hated this and I don't like it.
Yeah.
Doesn't help anybody.
Really good point. Two of the most important words to use for creative people: I'm confused. It's also good to say I'm confused to your wife or your spouse sometimes when you're in a fight. I just find I'm confused is a really good way to start, because he's like, I'm confused why you're yelling at me right now. It's somehow it's more disarming, and it hurts less. Anyway, this is so great. I'm excited to talk to you and kind of learn all these things. If the 31-year-old Trish talking to a 20-year-old Trish, what do you kind of wish you knew back then that you know now? Like, is there anything that in your character arc? Sorry to bring it full circle.
No, I love it.
How have you changed, or what have you learned?
I love that question. I think what we've touched on before, but a big piece of advice I would say is to tell people what your dream is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there'll be naysayers who are like, you shouldn't tell people what you want to do. I think you should, because you never know who'll be willing to help. And I think there's a lot of, artists, creative people, or whatever field you're in, who want to help, kind of more aspiring or younger or newer creators. And like for me, I was at a funeral talking to my uncle's neighbor, and her sister ended up being my literary agent. I mean, that's just, and like, I was prepared for that moment. I had a full polished manuscript I had worked for 2 years on, so I was ready for that moment. So I think that is like, tell people what you want to do and don't be shy about it or embarrassed. And I think the other thing is just like trusting your own intuition and confidence, because I really think I've always had a pulse on people and projects. I'm a pretty good judge of character. I'm like, oh, this person's a little sketch, or maybe they really don't have my best interest, and that's always played out. Or I really have a good feeling about this person or this partnership or this project. So really just like trusting your gut. Those are the two big things I would tell my 20-year-old self. And also just trust it's going to like work out. There was a lot of times where I was like, I don't know if this is ever going to happen. But I think that's natural. You're going to have self-doubt, and you have to just keep going.
Well, I'm glad your 31-year-old self is telling my 50-year-old self these things because it's helpful for me to hear them too.
Yeah, there's here's the thing, with writing, I would say writing is unique in this way, right? I think acting, I think professional sports, sometimes they can have time limits or ability limits, or you age out of something. But with writing, it's never too early or too late to start. I also think of another YA thriller author, Angeline Boley, who wrote Firekeeper's Daughter, which I don't know if you've read that, but it is.
I'm excited. You're giving me a
phenomenal.
good reading list. Me and my daughter can read these together, which I'm excited about.
Phenomenal. I mean, she's just
Really?
one of the best writers of this generation. But I she was, I think, in her 50s or maybe, I'm not sure how old she is when she published that book. And it just literally broke so much ground. And she's like, I had this idea since college, but I just didn't really have the time to work on it. And it's just been sitting with me for years. So yeah, you don't need to be the best new young thing. There's really no time limit, but you can be young. I've seen people who are in college and they get book deals and their books are fantastic. I just think everybody has your own timeline. I think the other thing too is you just can't compare yourself to others. You're on your own path and you just can't compare what someone else has done or whatever. You just got to stay true to your own course. I think that's important.
Trish, words of wisdom for someone of young years. You have a lot of wisdom that you've gained.
Oh, well, hopefully that's helpful. But
it's super helpful. Thank you so much. And thank you for kind of opening up the curtain here and letting us know all about how you came up with this really great book and your career and all this stuff. It's called The One That Got Away with Murder, and with murders in red blood on the cover. You cannot miss it.
Thank you. Thank you for chatting with me, and your questions were great. It was a pleasure.
The book is really a pleasure to read, and I'm excited about your recommendations too. So I've got a good reading list after this call. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Right About Now, hosted by my dad, Jonathan Small. If you like what you heard, there are a few ways you can help support the show. First, please leave a rating and review wherever you may listen to this podcast. This really helps others find Right About Now. You can also head over to patreon.com/rightaboutnowpodcast to make a donation. Finally, subscribe to the Right About Now newsletter called Small Talk on substack.com. This is Ella, encouraging you all to do the right thing.